This episode is brought to you by Sterling Soap Company. Fellas, you've heard the phrase, look good, feel good, right? But why not add smell good to that too? That's where Sterling Soap Company comes in. First, Sterling Soap is 100% natural and has a wide variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, and cologne. Second, there's a scent just for you. How about burgundy? Yeah, it's more than a color. The Sterling Soap folks blend natural essential oils with hints of mahogany, golden amber, and sandalwood. Or how about D503, an intensely masculine scent inspired by Legend by Mont Blanc. And third, you will feel good about the price. For just a little more than you'd pay at the grocery store, Sterling Soap will leave you feeling clean, refreshed, and ready for whatever's next. Give Sterling Soap a try today. Visit sterlingsoap.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
They made a movie about them called A League of Their Own. And on this episode of Sports Forgotten Heroes, we're going to discuss the very interesting career of one of the pioneers of women's professional baseball, Maybelle Blair.
This is Sports Forgotten Heroes, a tribute to the stars who shaped the games we love to watch and the games we love to play. Stars who provided us with many thrills, but when their time was up, they faded away. We'll take a look back at their spectacular careers, their moments of fame, even if it was just for one season or just one game. And now, here's your host, Warren Rogan.
Hello and welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes, episode number 153, Maybelle Blair. Throughout today's show, we'll sometimes just call her May. You know, in the movie A League of Their Own, director Penny Marshall had to take some license with the characters, and in the case of May, she did so with Madonna, who played the role of Mae Morabito. The real May, Maybelle Blair, didn't join the league until 1948. The All-America League formed in 1943. But many of the mechanics of the league that the movie portrayed were pretty accurate, such as scouts scouring the country to find players, the way the tryouts were conducted, and yeah, the uniforms. Maybelle Blair was a terrific softball player out on the West Coast, but she had to be convinced to join the league, and when she finally did, she signed on with the Peoria Redwings. But her story is so much more than that just of a baseball player. What she did off the field is pretty remarkable as well. Joining me on today's show to talk about May and some of the history of the league is author and professor emeritus Kat Williams from Marshall University. Her story is actually quite interesting as well. Before we get to it all, however, please take time now to follow, rate, and review Sports Forgotten Heroes wherever it is you are listening. If you have a question or a comment, reach out. Send me an email. Send it to sportsfh.info@gmail.com. That's sportsfh.info@gmail.com. Also, please follow Sports Forgotten Heroes on X at SportsFHeroes, and look for the Sports Forgotten Heroes page on Facebook as well. And as always, I thank you for your support. Okay, let's get into today's show with my guest, Kat Williams. Hey, Kat, welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes. I am thrilled that you are here.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you wrote a terrific book about Maybelle Blair, and let's start with that. For those who don't know who Maybelle Blair is, who was she and what is her role in baseball history?
Wow. That's how long is this podcast? How much time do you have? Maybelle Blair was played professional softball in the 30s and early 40s, and then was recruited by the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. Your listeners will know it from the movie A League of Their Own. She played 1 year for the Peoria Redwings. After that, she went back home to California and began a career at Northrop Aircraft, where she became the first female director of a department for Northrop Aircraft, but continued to create softball and baseball teams for women. She created the first ones at Northrop Aircraft. And most people are going to know her now because she was an advisor for the movie A League of Their Own. She was also an advisor, a very significant advisor for the Amazon series, A League of Their Own. And she also made waves on stage at the Tribeca Film Festival when the Amazon series debuted, when she came out at age 95 for the first time. Maybelle is she's not your typical baseball hero. She in fact, when I asked her about writing this book, she resisted for a long time because she said, I'm not a superstar. I wasn't this, I wasn't that. And so I said, yeah, you're right. If the only thing you've ever done is that 1 year playing for the league, you're right. But that isn't it. From the time she was 4 years old, she was helping to build fields. She was trying to play ball. She was making opportunities for girls and women to play ball, and she's done that her whole life. Up to and including 2014, when she was one of the founders of the International Women's Baseball Center. She has always been making a path, carving out a place for girls and women to play the game. And so she is much beloved by a lot of young girls and women, who many of them who were not even alive when the movie came out. So she is a superstar in that way. And I think her story is relevant to the game of baseball in its most fundamental form. And that is creating opportunities for everyone to play the game, to be on the field. And, let's face it, it's the best game, and everyone needs to have an opportunity to play it. And that's what she's done her whole life, is create those opportunities.
Yeah, she really did. I read your book here all the way.
Yep.
Terrific book, and a lot of nice background on it, beginning with her childhood, which
Yep.
you refer to. And one of the fun things that you discussed is the Alamo.
Yeah.
Hey, talk about the Alamo
Yeah.
and how Mae's family actually has some history there.
They do. One of the stories I tell in the book, Maybelle is larger than life. She tells stories, and when she walks into a room, and one of the ways I describe it, I think, is it's kind of like the earth shifts, and you kind of know your life is never going to be the same. And she tells these big stories. And so at one point, someone asked her, how is it, something about telling these stories. She said, I'm from Texas, and we do everything big and bold in Texas. And so I said, Maybelle, you're not from Texas. And she said, well, my family was. And in fact, some of my relatives were killed at the Alamo. And I'm like, okay. But she was born in California. So, so that became a little bit of a joke, but I went back and I did the research, and sure enough, 2 Blairs were indeed, they are on the wall at the Alamo. And so she considers herself Texan, by golly, and she's going to keep telling those Texas-side stories no matter where she was born.
How and why did her family become so involved in baseball?
Her father's family, when they still lived in Texas, there were several, he had several brothers, and then and cousins. They created a team called the Blair 9, and they loved the game of baseball. And they traveled around the small area and played other teams. And so her father was very much a fan of baseball, but also played baseball. Her mother was a big fan of baseball. And so when they moved to California, like so many people in the 30s, they really suffered from the Great Depression. And she says, it's what we did. We didn't, everybody, my family loved it. My uncles loved it. My cousins loved it. And so we played the game. We went across the street and turned an empty field into a ball diamond. And part of it was just generationally. She grew up loving and playing the game. And, part of it was too, as she says, look, we were poor. I mean, it's not like we were going to go off to the movies or, go shopping. What we did was play baseball. And so she was a very dedicated fan, but also a good ball player.
I think part of her indoctrination into the game was helping her brother, Bud, practice his pitching.
Yeah.
She had to stand at the plate and just let him whip that ball in there. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and first of all, I unfortunately never met her brother. He was a little older and he passed away before I had a chance to meet him. But she was loved her brother, was very devoted to him and he to her. And growing up, some of the way that she got to be involved in baseball was helping Bud. Who was a very good baseball player. And so her father and Bud her father would catch and Bud was a pitcher. And they would say, come on, Maybelle, come over here. Now stand, just hold the bat. Don't move. And Bud was not that old. I mean, I think he was a good pitcher, but I'm not sure how accurate he was. But they said, don't move. Just let him throw the ball. And she said, you would not believe. Sometimes those balls went whizzing past my head. Sometimes they went over my head. And she said, but I stood there, by God, I wasn't going to move. And her best days were when Bud and his friends were out practicing. And they would ask her to come out and shag fly balls for them. So, of course, she's running after all the balls, but to her, it was just, that was heaven, right? She was running around out in the field and shagging the balls for him. But yeah, he actually, as I understand it, was very, very good and injured his arm while he was in World War II. It was not a war injury. He actually injured it playing ball, but he was in the military.
I have this vision of Mae standing there and getting knocked around a little bit by the ball. And it reminds me of a story. I have a younger brother, and he was playing baseball, and he would always duck when a ball was inside. I'm like, you can't do that. You got to let that ball hit you, but it's going to hurt. And so we got home. I stood him up at the wall. If my parents ever knew this,
oh my God.
And I was winging the ball and hitting him. And the poor kid had so many bruises, but guess what? He didn't duck. He didn't duck anymore.
Yeah, no, I guess not. Yeah.
What a game. Well,
oh my gosh.
She really loved the game, but she had to settle on softball. And actually, I was somewhat surprised that back then, during her formative years, there was softball, but there was.
And
it wasn't necessarily just for girls or
no.
Men played softball back then as well. But when she did start playing softball, she really loved it. And she was, in elementary school or middle school, around the age, and she saw the boys' teams being in other schools. She wanted to play other schools.
Right.
So this infatuation with this game of baseball or softball really started with her at an early age. And I think some of her personality might have been formed at that time as far as persistence and
Mm-hmm.
not taking no for
Yeah.
an answer, because she convinced the school
Yeah.
to put together a travel team. Talk
Yeah.
about
I mean, she was in the fifth grade. And of course, her brother, again, a year, almost, maybe almost 2 years older, was playing ball, and their school team would go to the other local team and play. Well, Maybelle went to her fifth grade teacher and said, I think we should have a girls team, and I'll get it together. And somehow or another, she convinced this teacher to, yes, I will go to the principal and convince them to let you create a team. So she did. A little while later, of course, Maybelle's thinking, okay, so my brother and his team are traveling to other teams. We should get to do that as well. So not only does she convince them to create the team, but then eventually says, look, let's all, we can pile in somebody else's car. We can go near the, whatever the school is near, and play those teams. And they did that. And so when I think about when I was in the fifth grade, I was still trying to figure out, I don't know what color socks I'm wearing. I mean, it just is ridiculous. But she always, first and foremost, wanted to play herself, right? She loved the game. But also understood as she got a little bit older how important it is for everyone to have access to the game. And so that was part of it. But back then, when she was a girl, it was all about, we gotta play this game. And ultimately also, um uh, it became a point of fairness. And I think that as she got older, um that became a guiding force.
well, it really she had this insatiable love for the game, and she
Hmm.
pursued it to the point where after finishing up school, she joined some sort of, I had no idea that this even existed, a professional softball circuit back in the day.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Tell us more about that. What was it? Playing against military bases in California? How competitive was it? Who were the
Oh,
other teams? And I haven't even asked you this yet. Tell us about May's game.
well, first of all, let me just say that softball was very, very popular. Softball was never invented for women or by women. Softball was invented for men, by men, to play the game indoors during Chicago winters. So this was never a quote soft alternative to baseball. And during the 30s, softball was enormously popular, and
Hmm.
and women's fast pitch softball was and is, if you spend any time at all watching it even today, very competitive, very
My
exciting.
daughter played for many years. She was a pitcher. I was
Yeah.
a coach. And yeah, I know how competitive that game.
Yeah, exactly. And so back then there were professional women's softball leagues. Maybelle played for professionally for the Chicago Cardinals. And before that, though, and I think what you were referring to was, she played on a couple of different teams. One was the Pasadena Ramblers, and they were a professional, semi-professional team during the war. Now, before the war, they were playing, they were just playing in various leagues and things. But during the war, what they did was travel up and down the West Coast. And it was more of a, we're kind of doing this for the soldiers sort of thing. And they played games at different military bases. Um, she remembers one time playing at a military base that actually housed German POW.
Oh, wow.
And so the POWs were, of course, enclosed in a fenced area, but they could see some of the game and they were yelling. And so that's I think what you were referring to. But beyond that, the New Orleans Jacks were an extremely good, nationally known professional softball team. She played a little with them. Women's professional softball in the 30s and into the 40s was extremely popular and also very successful. And it was that model that Philip Wrigley and some of the other owners, business people, used to create the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. It started as a softball league. When he first created it, it was the All-American Girls Softball League,
Oh,
because they understood how incredibly popular it was. And so they used, most of the players had played, if not professionally, they had played a lot of softball. So her softball days she is very fond of those days. In fact, the picture on the front of the book is from her playing days with the Chicago Cardinals. And she played second base, and was a very good second baseman. She also could pitch a little bit, but was not, underhand fast pitch was not her game. When she was recruited to play for the All-Americans, she was a pitch. They basically hired her as a pitcher.
mm,
But again, she was only there one season, and she'll be the first to say, I was not a superstar in that league. I was not. This is not about, traditional sports biographies. It's the person with the highest batting average or the most home runs or the person that played the longest or whatever. And she didn't have any of that. And part of the reason this is so important for me is that those are some of the elements that I think are so important about the game and the beauty of the game. It's like, whatever your batting average is, and let's face it, unless you're Ty Cobb or Babe Ruth or Pete Rose or, most of us love and play the game at a really different level. But what we get out of that game, those opportunities, the love of that game, that's what's important. And that's what she represents.
yeah, she was a part of, very much a part of the very fabric of the game, of the
Yes.
women's
Yep.
game.
Yep.
And you just talked about it. You touched upon it. The Chicago Cardinals, always
Yep.
one of my favorite uh, uh, trivia questions is name the oldest team in the NFL. People,
Mm.
Packers, the Bears. No, it's actually the Arizona Cardinals. Were the original Chicago Cardinals,
Yep.
and they had this softball team, this women's softball team, owned
Yep.
by Charles Bidwell, the
Yes.
same Bidwell family that
Mhm.
still owns the Arizona Cardinals,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they were at the very root of
Mhm.
professional women's softball.
Yep.
So tell us a little more about that league and
Mhm.
how competitive it was, and who else were some of the teams?
Well, it was very competitive, and in fact, a number of the players who either played in the softball league, it was called the National Women's Baseball League, although it was softball. A number of the women who played in that league and ultimately moved to the All-Americans, many of them went back to softball because over the 12 years of the All-American League, um, they continued to increase the base paths and they changed it started out underhand pitch and then it became sort of a sidearm, and then they went to full overhand, and the distance from the pitching mound to home plate, all of that changed. And a lot of the catchers were concerned that they were going to injure their arms trying to make that throw down to second. So a lot of that changed. And what happened was many of those women went back to softball. And so that league was extremely competitive. And I would say that many of the players that we count as sort of superstars in the All-Americans, they were superstars first in the professional softball league, and in many cases even later. Then the number of teams and the individuals who played in all those other teams, I don't have a whole lot of that information, but it was so popular that whether you're talking about the South in New Orleans, whether you're talking about the West Coast or the Midwest, women's softball leagues were, and we're not talking like recreational beer leagues, right? We're talking about these are women getting paid to play ball at a high level, and that was really the beginning of Maybelle's professional career playing ball.
Well, she born in California, even though she said she's a Texan. She was born in California, played against those military teams or on military bases. How was she discovered by this league in Chicago? Did they send
the softball league or Well, she was friends with a lot of young women who were maybe a year or two older and played in that league, or had other acquaintances who played in that league. And so at various times, she would go to ballparks and play with some of those women. She would play pickup games or whatever. And she was discovered. Basically, she was recruited, not unlike the scenes in the movie A League of Their Own, where the scout comes out and was watching these. Yeah. Brilliant character. Where those guys come out and they see these young women playing. And again, as that scene did, they were watching them play softball. And so that's how she was recruited. Basically, she had a group of friends and folks that she played ball with, and there you have it. And it was when she was in Chicago playing, and she tells the story about, the first time one of the scouts from the All-Americans saw her, she was kind of sitting in the dugout showing off and showing how she could throw a curveball, and she knew how to do this and she knew how to do that. And so that was the first time she kind of got the attention of those guys. But it was very similar to those scenes in the movie.
Her willingness, her eagerness, her wanting to go to Chicago wasn't, you would think, oh my gosh, I have this wonderful opportunity. But she had truly never, ever left home.
No.
And she had never really left her mother's side.
No.
That dynamic and just how close Mae's family was, and was to leave.
Yeah, that was really hard. And she jokes about it even now, but she said, Kat, I had never even spent a night away from my mother. My mother brushed my hair for me. She did everything for me. She said she spoiled me. But this opportunity, you're a young woman and you have this opportunity to go off and get paid. And, this was just, she always had a sense of adventure. And so that made it okay. But she was afraid. And when she got to Chicago on the train and they met her They took her to the hotel, and uh, she was terrified. And first, she was in a room by herself. So what she did was push the dresser over in front of the door, and then she said, "I got myself a stack of baseballs." And set them beside the bed. And if anybody tried to come in that door, I was going to throw a baseball at them. Now, it's like the mind of a young person, right? But it took a lot of courage. And I would say that is a story that is a familiar one if you talk to a lot of the young women who went to play in the All-American League. Many of them were 15, 16 years old, and they were nervous. And so she was afraid, but she was also cocky, so that kind of paid off for her, I think.
I think if I follow the story correctly, so she gets out to Chicago, she's playing in this professional softball league.
Mm-hmm.
I think at this point, this was around the same time as when the the All America Women's Professional Baseball League was
Yeah.
around the
Yeah.
same.
Right.
So she was recruited to play in that, but she went back home to California again. And
She did. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah. The All-Americans had already started. They started in 1943. And Maybelle didn't go to Chicago until 47, I think, maybe 46 into 47. And so that league, the All-American League, had already started, and she knew some of those women that were playing in it. But again, her focus was softball, and that was where her contacts were and her friends played. So she played in Chicago. At the end of the season, she went back to California. One of her friends came with her, and again, she had sort of some connections with the league, with the All-American League, and they had again the story of they'd kind of seen her messing around and showing off a little bit pitching, and so she went back to California in the off season, and it was there that one of the scouts from the All-Americans finally said, look, I think you should come and play for the All-Americans and, play in our league. And that's when she tells the story that I include in the book, that the scout said, we're going to, I want to come and ask your parents if they'll let you come and play. And she said, I don't think my mom's going to let me do that. I think it was hard enough for her to go the first time. And so he said, well, I'm going to follow you home. And Maybelle said, you can do that. But I'm telling you, my mother's not going to let me leave this house. And so they talked for a long time. And the scout said, Mrs. Blair, I don't think you understand. We're going to pay her $55 a week. And her mom was like, George, go crank up the car. I'm going to pack her bag. That was more money than her father made. And that was true for a lot of those young women. And so, yeah, they put her butt on a train, right? And she certainly didn't suffer for that. She was glad to do it. But so there was a lot of that back and forth in that first year or two. But once she went to Chicago, they had a form of tryouts, and she became a Peoria Redwing and was a pitcher.
So is this sort of where the movie would have started, A League of Your Own? Is this sort of how this would have started? At least this is where that time frame begins, no? And
a little earlier. I mean, the league started in 1943, so the movie really starts with the very beginning of the league.
yeah.
So they focus on the Rockford Peaches, but
Right.
it is the beginning of the league and the struggles of the league. At first I think people were afraid the women, they didn't take it seriously. Was this a, kind of a clown show kind of thing? And actually it didn't take that long for people to realize these were talented ball players.
Mhm.
And but so yeah, but Blair played in 1948 for Peoria. So there was they had already been going for a little while.
Is there a character in the movie at all based off of May? I mean, which
No,
there is
no, none of the
didn't come in till 2 or 3 years into the league's existence.
Well, the movie, all of the characters in the movie are composite characters. No matter what so and so's grandmother said or so and so's aunt said, there was no particular Dottie. There was, and so the how she got the nickname all the way was it, that became a nickname long after the movie came out. She was not the Madonna character. Madonna was not
I
playing
guess
her.
that's sort of where I was going.
Yeah.
Where does that name all the way May?
Well,
Yeah,
of course, the movie comes out and Madonna, and she was somewhat flashy during the movie, but not like she actually was. But that's the character, right? The painted fingernails and the sunglasses and the big hair and the, sparkly this and that. And that's Maybelle. And so, people kind of, as a joke, started calling her that. And so she actually went through, it was funny when people first started calling her that. She said, I don't want people to think that I'm trying to say I was Madonna, so she was worried about it. And then I was like, you know what? Just enjoy it. It's a joke, it's enjoy it. So that is precisely why my book is called All the Way and not All the Way May. Because there are reasons for that. That is her mantra in some ways, right? We from sun up till sundown, from the time I'm a kid till I'm under the ground. I'm gonna keep moving. But I also did not want to misrepresent that nickname. So
I don't want to get into too much of her personal life, but we
mhm.
will. But I do
Yep,
want to talk about some of the other off the field stuff.
yep,
First being Northrop Aircraft that
yep,
you spoke about
yep,
earlier. Her
mhm,
career there, how she worked there, left, came back, and then moved into
yep,
management roles. I mean, a woman back in that day,
yeah, yeah,
management role in
I know,
such an important company.
yep,
She was very thorough, and she
yep.
admired, I think his name was Jack Northrop.
Yes, she loved Mr. Northrop.
Talk
Yep,
about her time there and the
yeah.
dynamic between her and Jack Northrop.
Yeah, she started. Her brother worked at Northrop, and that's who he worked for when World War II started. And so when Maybelle got to the age where she was sort of looking for maybe jobs in the summer and things like that, she was hired there. She literally is this story, the start off in the mailroom, and then that story. And so she started out as like a gopher, as a runner, and she went and played ball, and then she'd come back in the summer and she'd work part-time again, and so on and so forth. And so when she finished playing in 1948 with the Peoria team, she had injured her legs and just she was starting to think, this, I need a job. I need to take care of myself. So she went back to California. She got a job as a chauffeur for Northrop. She drove generals around. She drove Ronald Reagan. And obviously long before he was president, but so she worked her way up and she worked in transportation. Eventually, they asked her about becoming manager of the division of transportation. And she said, only on one condition, that I learned to drive every single vehicle from forklift to 18-wheeler. And she did. She learned to drive every single one of them. And
How can you lead a department if you don't know how everything works?
exactly. And she ran, I think, a really successful department. I think the guys that worked under her really respected her. Um, and she ultimately retired in the 80s. She had a back injury and then also ultimately had some heart problems. And so, she was at a point where, she wasn't that old, but I think retirement was right around the corner and she had some health issues. So she retired. But as she says, to this day, she loved every second of working there. And she worked there under Mr. Northrop himself. And she got to know him and she respected him and believed that despite the time, he gave her that opportunity. So she has not forgotten that. And she feels like she wasn't someone who was going to be a lawyer or a doctor or, but
But
she had an incredible career.
well, but her mother, again, going back to her mom, had a
Yeah.
lot of influence over her.
Oh, yeah.
And her mother actually, if I understand correctly, demanded that Mae leave her first gig as
Yeah.
a physiotherapist.
Yeah.
Talk about that as well. I mean, Mae she didn't lack brains. She was
Oh, God, no. No.
stupid.
No.
So
She,
she got a degree in physiotherapy,
right.
but it
Yep.
affected her
Yeah, it
significantly.
did.
Very,
Yeah.
we talk about.
Yeah. It really did. She had a difficult time. Uh, she loved working with the patients, but I think she got herself really involved emotionally. And it really took a toll on her. And again, she was young. I mean, it's not like she was all that experienced in the world either, but it took its toll physically on her. I think it was hard. Some of the patients were in pretty bad shape, and so she had a really hard time with that. And her mother, for a while, encouraged her, and encouraged her to, try not to be so focused or whatever. I mean, that's my language, not her mother's, obviously. But then eventually it got so bad. Her mother said, "You have got to quit this job. You can't do this job anymore." And Maybelle, she didn't argue. She knew her mother was right, and so she did leave that job. But and I don't I may be wrong about this, but I don't think she grieved the loss of that job. I mean, I think she liked it. She felt like she was doing important work, but I don't think it was, this is my lifelong dream and I'm devastated I can't do it anymore.
Mhm.
So she ended up in the right place, that's for sure.
Well, it certainly sounds like this. And of course, during all of this time, she sort of led a secret life as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Tell us about this and how she had to hide it in public for
Yeah.
fear of reprisal.
Yeah, I mean, and that was the case back then. I mean, when we're talking about the 50s, 60s, and certainly into the 70s, we're talking about the height of the Cold War. We're talking about McCarthyism. And so, if she had been found out that she was gay, and she herself uses the word gay, so that's how I will refer to her. She, if she had been found out, she would have lost her job and very likely arrested. And that is not uncommon. That was the nature of it. And so, you know, people got good at hiding it. This is my friend. You still dressed in a very feminine way. You wore makeup. There were certain things that um, you just pretended you had a boyfriend, or not that Maybelle did that, but that you had to hide it. And it was a very, very scary time.
But her
And
family knew, right? Her family knew.
no, there was never a discussion about it.
Family, right? Wasn't
I'm
there some?
sorry?
Didn't somebody, or maybe it was a brother-in-law or sister-in-law or somebody knew something.
Well, I let me put it this way. They never had a conversation about it
Okay.
until she came out a couple, 3 years
Okay.
ago.
Okay, right.
Yeah, and
We knew it or something like
yeah, her
that.
nephew,
Oh, that's what it was.
yeah, her nephew Rod, who is, again, she adores Rod, and he adores her. He and his wife and two sons take care of Maybelle. Um, I interviewed him for the book, and I said, "So what was that like?" And he's like, "Well, there's a saying, something like that happens, you just say next." I said, "Of course we always knew. Of course
Of
we
course,
knew."
that's what it
You
was.
know, and yet when she came out, she was 95 years old. And like within a couple of days, she called me and she said, "Kat, I am so scared. I am so upset. What's my family gonna say?" I mean, and you know, first of all, I kind of joke with her. I said, "Oh, seriously, they love you, right? That's not going to be an issue." But then it's very sad. I mean, the fact that she was so brave at age 95 to come out, but then immediately that fear took over. Um, and of course, Rod and his family were wonderful. They've always been wonderful. No one was surprised, Warren. That's the but for her, that was a major, major thing. And so she would never have had that conversation with her brother. She would never have had it with her parents. And back then, very few people would have.
Sure, sure. During all of this, right? She played, in the All America Girls Baseball League.
Mm-hmm.
Left, then she, wound up at Northrop and all that. But during all of this, she still played softball. She
Yeah.
still created teams, and
Yep.
she played some professionally.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that part of her professional softball
Mm-hmm.
life
Yeah.
after she left the All Americans.
Well, yeah, she played in. She would play, for example. I mentioned the New Orleans Jacks, and
They were a heck of a team, right?
they were amazing. They were amazing, and so and I use them kind of as an example. But the teams like that would travel, and they came to out to the West Coast, and they picked her up, and she played with them along the West Coast. So it was sort of she didn't travel with them to other states. And she did that a couple of times with some other teams, the Pasadena Ramblers and some others. And they would play games in California and Arizona, sort of out west. And so she continued to do that. But as her job at Northrop increased, she had to pull back a little bit, obviously, on playing in that real competitive way. Now, she did help to create a team at Northrop, and she continued to play for a while, maybe less competitively. But then she really was focused on, helping to create the teams and coaching the teams and that kind of stuff.
There's another big name, I believe, in the Maybelle Blair story, and that's Shirley Berkovich.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Me about who was Shirley, and how did Shirley and Mae's friendship develop?
Shirley Berkovich. Shirley, first of all, passed away in March. It was 3 years in March. Shirley was a Rockford Peach, and she was originally from Pittsburgh, but moved to California, and was she worked at the Pacific Bell, maybe was the telephone company then, and ultimately retired from there. She and Maybelle did not know one another when they played. They played at different times, and they didn't actually meet until some of the first reunions of the All-American Girls League Players Association. It was in the late 80s that Maybelle went to one of the reunions. Shirley was there. Shirley was so quiet and shy, and she changed a lot over the years. But even the years that I knew her was still much. You've got Maybelle. They're a little like Mutt and Jeff or yin and yang. They're very different in some ways, but great friends and great partners. And so they met, and Maybelle volunteered Shirley to work with her to host a reunion out in California. Shirley was dumbfounded, terrified, but they did it, and they ultimately hosted a number of reunions in California, and they became very, very dear friends. And also, both of them, Shirley and Maybelle, were founders of the International Women's Baseball Center. Shirley and Maybelle went to more, they threw out more first pitches, went to more fantasy camps. I mean, they were all over the country, bringing attention to girls and women's baseball. And the loss of Shirley was felt very deeply, certainly not only by Maybelle, but me and many others.
Their mission was a good mission, but there was a lot of disagreement in how to move this players association that they wanted to create. There was a
Right.
lot of disagreement on how to move it forward. And I sort of find it sad that Mae's association with the All America Girls Professional Baseball League was affected by this.
Yeah, it was. She was very dedicated to the All-Americans, as was Shirley. They were both on the All-Americans board. I was also on that board. At one point, I was the president of the Players Association. And Shirley, especially Maybelle, but Shirley as well, really wanted them to move beyond just doing these reunions every year. And their mission, though, was to preserve the history of that league. And so what they were focused on was doing just that and having these reunions. Well, eventually, the writing was on the wall. I mean, there were not going to be any reason to have reunions. And so it was not just Maybelle and Shirley. It was also two other ball players, former ball players, Karen Kunkel and Jane Moffitt, who really pushed, we need to do more. We need to have a museum. We need to have some sort of educational center or something like that. But the core group was resistant to it. And I don't really understand why. I mean, they had particular reasons, but I didn't completely understand it. And so Maybelle was outspoken, and she really believed that this could happen. She took the brunt of a lot of negativity, but to this day remains loyal to the All-Americans. There is no question she is a former All-American and is very loyal to them. But it was in 2014 that Shirley and Jane Moffitt and Karen Kunkel and Maybelle and myself, Donna Cohen, sat in Maybelle's living room and said, nobody's going to do this for us. We have to do it for ourselves. And we all basically threw in $20 and created the International Women's Baseball Center. And our mission was the preservation of the history and the legacy of all girls and women in baseball, all aspects of baseball internationally. And we've been pretty successful at it.
How did you get involved? How did you meet Mae? Where do you enter this
Yeah.
story?
Well, I, as a college professor, I taught U.S. women's history and the history of sports. And so I was looking in 2003, I was looking for a project, and I wanted to do something on that league, but I wasn't sure what. And so I went to Cooperstown, to the National Baseball Hall of Fame, to their archives. There I met the archivist, Tim Wiles, and Tim was very dedicated to the All-American League. He was a big fan of theirs, and a lot of those women knew him. So when I was there, he said, they have a players association. You could join as an associate member and you can go to these reunions. And I was like, oh my God, you're kidding. It's like, this is a dream come true. So that September, 2003 was the 60th anniversary of the league. I went to their reunion in Syracuse, New York, and it was there that I met several of the ball players. The next year, I went to my second reunion, and that's when I met Maybelle. And my description of meeting her, when I say it's like your life will never be the same. It's kind of like you're turned on your head. That was pretty much it. And we're alike in a lot of ways. And we became friends. And over the years, we've fussed and fumed with one another, and we're just, but we are family. Maybelle is my family, and so she has influenced me in enormous ways. But I became more and more involved in the association as I continued to go to the reunions and things, and then ultimately was elected to the board. And it was then that I got more involved in the sort of inner workings of it. And I too felt like, gosh, you can be doing so much more. That league is so important in the history of girls and women in baseball, but it is a tiny, tiny little tick on a very long timeline. And so we believe at the IWBC, we believe that while that history is important and should be preserved and honored, all of it should be. And so that's kind of the difference. But yeah, my meeting of Maybelle Blair was strictly by accident, but it was a happy one.
What can you tell us about Maybelle today?
Oh, she is 98, and just before we got on this podcast, I got a text. She is in North Carolina. She still lives in California. She is in North Carolina at an event. And apparently the line is long to get her autograph on these books. So she is still very dedicated to the preservation of the history, but also about growing those opportunities for girls and women. The International Women's Baseball Center is located in Rockford, Illinois, the home of the Rockford Peaches. And we are about to launch a capital campaign where we are renovating Beyer Stadium, where the Peaches played. But we are also building a museum, an educational center, and an activities center. This is the home of girls and women's baseball internationally, Rockford, Illinois. And she is dedicated to that. She is a big reason that we are there. And she's still just as dedicated and working just as hard. And nearly every phone call I have with her ends with her saying, "While I'm on this side of the grass, Williams." So no pressure at all.
Well, what can you tell us about this new women's league that somebody's trying to form, the Women's Professional Baseball League?
Yeah,
it's involved. What can you tell us about it? What do you
know? Very exciting. It's the Women's Pro Baseball League. Justine Siegel, who is the founder of Baseball for All and a very, very important figure in women's baseball, is one of the co-founders. The other is a businessman named Keith Stein. And I am actually on the advisory committee for this league. I don't have any control or power. I am simply on the advisory committee. But I was honored to be asked because I think this is a great opportunity. It made huge headlines on CNN and ESPN, and it's been on the Drew Barrymore show. And this is a big deal. And just between you and me and your listeners, I'm thinking they need to come and play part of, if not all, that season at Bayer Stadium, because how cool would it be for the newest professional women's baseball league to come back and play at the spot of the last one?
There should be something in Rockford without it.
Oh my God. Oh yeah. And they're, I'm really kind of, pushing the envelope here, but they are very, as a league, I don't pretend to have the ins, right? But I know that they have started registration for tryouts. And the plan is that they will start playing in May of next year.
2026.
26, right. So it's just so exciting. And, it's been a long time coming. It needs to happen. Girls and women play this game. We've always played this game. We've continued to play this game. We umpire it and coach it and tend the fields and keep the scores. We do all of it, and we always have. And there is no reason that we can't have another league of their own. And I don't care if it's played in Bayer or Timbuktu. Women need to have that opportunity, and I think this league will provide that.
Well, you have women's professional ice hockey. Obviously, you have the WNBA. You have these professional volleyballs.
Right.
Women's professional soccer league.
Right.
You should have women's professional baseball. Tell us a little bit more about your book, All the Way May. Where can people get a copy of it? And how proud are you of this?
I am very proud of it. I tell people it's a little book with a big story. And it is a small book. It was intentional. It is accessible to everyone, and that is part of it. I wanted it to be her voice, and her story. I am very proud of it. It was one of the hardest books I've written. This is my third, and it is one of the hardest ones because I felt the pressure. I felt the responsibility of it. You can order it, if folks that want to use Amazon, you can order it on Amazon. You can also go to Roman and Littlefield website and order it directly from them. And I'm not sure where else. There may be some others like Barnes and Noble. I'm not sure, but I know those two. And I just I hope people take a read and understand that this is a story about strength and courage and love and dedication, and that sums up Maybelle Blair.
Well, it was a fun book for me to read. I'm so glad you and I were able to connect.
Me too.
Kat, I'm thrilled you were here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. This is wonderful. Thank you so much.
The All-America Girls Professional Baseball League lasted 12 years from 1943 through 1954, with the Rockford Peaches walking away with the most titles, 4. Thanks again to my guest today, Kat Williams, and thanks to all of you for being here, and I'll see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.
The heel gets the heat. The babyface gets the cheers. But the jobber gets, well, the job done. And speaking of jobbers, Barry Horowitz wasn't there to win titles. He was there to build them. By selling every move, every storyline, and every new star that stepped into the ring. He was the secret sauce. And now, he's the headline in his new book titled, Wrestling is My Gimmick, My Life on the Wrong Side of the 3 Count. This memoir is a deep dive into wrestling's most underrated position, and the man who made it an art form. Whether you're a fan of wrestling, a fan of sports history, or just love a great story, this book is for you. Again, that's Wrestling Is My Gimmick by Barry Horowitz. Grab your copy today before the count strikes 3.